In this video I'm going to teach you how to do a color-coded harmony comparison. This is taking the Gospels side by side in a harmony, then using highlights and underlines to show the similarities and differences between the Gospels. Here's the color scheme that we will use. I encourage you either to use Word and then underline and highlight using the Word tools, or print this out and then use map colors or use pens and highlighters to do the same thing. If you don't have one of these colors and you're doing it by hand, then you can substitute for another color, such as using purple instead of red. If you do that, however, please indicate on your harmony the different color and what it means if you differ from this scheme. If you use the colors in this scheme, you don't need to give me the color code because I already know what it is. So here's what you do. Each word will either be highlighted or underlined. If it's highlighted, then that's showing this is unique material. There's no other gospel that has that material. If it's a red underline, that means it's in all three synoptic gospels. If it's solid, it's verbatim. If it's broken, it is just similar. Black means it's material that's in Matthew and Mark. Solid, verbatim. Broken, just similar. Blue is material that is in Matthew and Luke. Solid if it's verbatim, broken if it's just similar. Green is material that's in Mark and Luke. So this is the color scheme, and again, every word will have one mark, and only one mark. In other words, it would not make sense for a word to have a black and red underline, because red would trump black, because red means all three gospels. It would not make sense for a word to be highlighted and underlined, because highlight means unique. Underline means it's in two or more gospels. So again, only one mark per word. So now let's look at the text. Here we have section 203 from the Thomas Harmony, and they're in the gospel canonical order, Matthew, Mark, then Luke. First thing I typically do is look over the text and see what material is unique and then highlight that material. Often verses like verse 15 that have nothing on either side, then that's unique material. Or verse 11, often that's unique. However, you need to look at the verses above and below in the other Gospels and see possibly it's not unique because some things are mentioned there. So for instance, here in verse 11, there are earthquakes, plagues, and famines that Jesus mentions. Well, in Matthew we see earthquakes and famines, and in Mark we see earthquakes and famines, and so those will not be unique. Though plagues is unique, so we'll highlight plagues and then go up here to make that unique by highlighting it. And there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. That's unique because that's not in Matthew or Mark, and so then we'll highlight that as well. But then we see the earthquakes and famines. Well, that is the same in the others, so we'll have red to designate that it is in all three Gospels. Let's go up a little ways to see nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And then we see in Mark, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And in Matthew we see the same thing. And in various places there'll be famines and earthquakes. That's said a little different way in each one. And then we see that it's begun with, then he continued by saying to them, and that's unique to Luke. So we'll highlight that. So nation rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom is verbatim, except the four in Matthew and Mark. So let's go ahead and underline that. Go up to the underline, and I like to put a thick underline to make sure you see the color for sure. Then go up to the drop down arrow, do the color, and the color will be red because it's in all three. If you're going to do the same mark, again, you can put your cursor on the mark and then double click on Format Painter, and then wherever you highlight, then that mark will be dropped. So nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom. All of this is somewhat subjective, and what I mean by that, we could include the four and have a broken line, or if you want to point out that that's in Matthew and Mark but not in Luke, then we'll simply give that a black underline. Go to the color, call it black, and then I'll do the Format Painter, and then there. That shows the difference there. And then, but the earthquakes and famines, that's worded a little differently in all three. So for that one, we'll give it the broken red underline. So go to the drop-down arrow, broken underline, and then drop-down arrow, underline color, red. Then I'll double click Format Painter. So now as I highlight that, it'll do the red, and highlight that, it'll do the red, and then the famines, it'll do the red. As you see, every word has either an underline or a highlight. Then we can go back to the top. I was just starting with what I saw were some unique materials. And Jesus answered and said to them, and Jesus began to say to them, and he said. So 2 mention Jesus, 1 says he. Now first I'll turn off the Format Painter, since I'll no longer be at least doing that formatting for the moment. We see answered and said is unique. So I'm going to go here, highlight that, and then show that Matthew has answered and said, the others don't. But then Matthew has and Jesus, Mark has and Jesus, Luke has and he. Now here you could show that Matthew and Mark are the same, so do the black. But since Luke's essentially saying the same thing, but not using Jesus' name, but that's who he's referring to, we'll go ahead and just simply use the broken line. Except we do have Matthew and Mark verbatim. See to it that no one misleads you. Luke is, see to it that you are not misled. So that would be a broken line. For many will come in my name, saying I'm a he, and the time is at hand, do not go after them. Okay, so the time is at hand, that's unique. And do not go after them, that's also unique. In this first part, then we'll use red because it's in all 3. We'll do the broken underline. I'm going ahead and double click on the Format Painter. I'm going to do the broken underline for began to say and then Matthew said, because we see there's a difference there. Now of course when you see this in the Greek it's easier because you match up words exactly, and these are English translations. But the and Jesus and then what he said, to them, see to it that no one misleads you, that's verbatim. So I'm going to turn off the Format Painter. I'm going to underline and Jesus, then go back up here and give that a solid and a red underline. Then double click the Format Painter, and then and Jesus, and to them, and then see to it that no one misleads you. Now notice there's the green squiggly underline here. That's simply a word squiggle, and it's saying there's possibly a grammatical error. So don't let the squiggle deceive you, because remember green does show material that's the same in Mark and Luke. So underline that, and then underline that. So verbatim, verbatim, but then similar, so that's the broken underline there. All right, so many will come in my name, saying I am he. What we see here, and will mislead many, that occurs just in Matthew and Mark. So underline, and will mislead many. This time we will use the black underline, and it's verbatim, Format Painter. And then many will come in my name saying I am he. Well, that's the same except I am the Christ in Matthew. Now to show that's unique, I'm going to go ahead and say the Christ and then highlight that. And then for the rest of that, to give it a red broken underline. And use the Format Painter. Then, since both Mark and Luke say he, I'm going to go back to that and then give that a green underline, solid. So that's verbatim. Go back to Format Painter and then change that red broken to a solid green. Remember, each word can only have one marking on it. Now, I say this is a little subjective. These are referring to the same person, but I like to point out that both Mark and Luke have I am he, whereas Matthew has him saying I am the Christ, and so that's unique. So hopefully you see now how to do this. You're seeing what are the differences, what are the uniquenesses, and if it's in 2 or more Gospels, then you color code them accordingly. So far we've not had any blue, and that is material that's in Matthew and Luke, but not in Mark. But you will come across passages that have blue as well. So this is how to do your synoptic marking. Have fun and happy marking.